The boardroom table? My company. 38 years of my life. The Mediator's pen stopped moving, and I watched my brother's confident smile crack for the first time in 7 months. That morning started like any typical court day. I'd spent 4 weeks in mediation, listening to my younger brother Brian explain why he deserved 40% of Mitchell and Sons Construction, the company I'd built from nothing while he was getting his accounting degree in Toronto. The mediator, James Thornton, seemed sympathetic to Brian's case. Too sympathetic. I'd figure out why later, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really began. Not 7 months ago when Brian filed the lawsuit. Not even 4 years ago when our father died. This started 38 years ago, in 1986, when I was 24 and naive enough to believe that hard work and family loyalty meant something. I'd just finished my apprenticeship as a general contractor in Edmonton. My father worked for CN Rail. My mother was a school administrator. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. Brian was 17 and already showing signs of what my mother called academically gifted and what I privately called allergic to getting his hands dirty. One evening after dinner, my father pulled me aside. "Tom, your brother's going places. University, maybe even chartered accountant designation. Smart kid. You know we can't afford to send both of you to university." I nodded. I'd never been much for school anyway. "I know, Dad, but you've got good hands. You've got a knack for building. Why don't you start something of your own? I've got $12,000 saved up. It's yours if you want to build something with it." $12,000. In 1986, that was enough to buy tools, lease a small workspace, and survive for about 8 months if I was careful. I took it. I called the company Mitchell and Sons Construction. Named it that because I hoped one day my own kids would join me. I worked 80-hour weeks for the first 6 years. Residential renovations, commercial fit-outs, custom home builds for the new developments spreading across the Edmonton suburbs during the oil boom. By the time Brian graduated high school, I had 5 employees. By the time he finished his Bachelor of Commerce at U of T, I had 18 employees and had just landed my first major municipal contract. By the time he completed his CPA designation, I'd transformed Mitchell and Sons into Edmonton's premier mid-size construction firm with 63 employees, an annual revenue of $7 million. Brian became a corporate accountant. He worked for various firms in Toronto for 12 years, then moved back to Alberta, taking a position with an oil and gas company in Calgary. He published articles in accounting journals. He served on professional committees. He never asked about the business, never visited the office, never showed any interest in what I'd built. Dad was proud of both of us, in his way. My son, the accountant, and my son, the builder, he'd say at family dinners. But I noticed something over the years. When Brian came home for Christmas, Dad's eyes lit up in a way they never did for me. When Brian published another article, Dad kept copies in his study. When I won the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce Business Excellence Award in 2010, Dad said, "That's great, son," and went back to reading Brian's latest journal piece. I'm not complaining. I understood. Brian was the success story. I was just a guy who built things. Mom was diagnosed with vascular dementia in 2018. Dad took care of her for 2 years before his heart gave out in November 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. Brian flew in from Calgary for the funeral, stayed 3 days, and went back. I was the one who moved Mom into a specialized memory care facility, who visited her 4 times a week, who paid the monthly fee of $7,200, because her care needs exceeded what the public system could provide. Brian contributed $600 a month. "Accountant's salary isn't like yours, big-time construction mogul," he'd say. 6 months after Dad's funeral, Brian called me. "We need to talk about the business, Tom." I was in my truck, driving back from a job site inspection. "What about it?" Dad promised me a share. Family legacy. He told me dozens of times over the years. I nearly drove into the median on Whitemud Drive. What? Dad always said the business was for both of us. Family legacy. He told me that over and over. "Tom, Brian, I built this company. Dad gave me $12,000 in 1986. That was his contribution. Everything else is 38 years of my life. Dad said it was a family business. Family includes me. Tom, I've been patient. I've let you run things, make the decisions, but now it's time to formalize the arrangement. I want 40% ownership, and I want it in writing. I pulled into a Tim Hortons parking lot. Brian, are you serious? Dead serious. You've had 38 years to build wealth. I've been working in accounting, making a fraction of what you make. Dad knew this. He wanted to balance things. He told me, Tom, multiple times, the business is for both my sons. Even if Dad said that, which I doubt, it has no legal validity. The company is registered in my name. I have 38 years of tax returns, business records, everything. It's mine. We'll see what a lawyer says. I'm giving you a chance to do this the right way, Tom. Family way. 40-60 partnership, or I file suit for what Dad promised me. He hung up. I sat in that parking lot for 90 minutes, watching people go in and out for their coffee and donuts, trying to process what had just happened. My younger brother, who I'd watched grow up, who I'd helped pay for his second certification when things were tight, who'd never shown any interest in my business, was threatening to sue me. I called my wife, Patricia. We'd been married 34 years, raised 3 kids, who were now in their late 20s and early 30s with their own families. He's bluffing, she said. Brian isn't that person. He's your brother. But he wasn't bluffing. 3 weeks later, I received a legal notice from a law firm in Calgary. Brian was suing me for 40% ownership of Mitchell & Sons Construction, claiming that our father had made a verbal promise that the company would be divided between his sons and that this promise constituted a binding agreement. He was also claiming $850,000 in retroactive compensation for his theoretical stake in the company over the past 12 years. The statement of claim was 87 pages long. It painted me as a manipulative older brother who'd exploited family resources and parental favoritism to build a business that rightfully belonged to both of us. The claim alleged I'd systematically excluded Brian from business decisions. The claim alleged that Dad had repeatedly and consistently promised Brian 40% of the business, with specific dates and conversations listed. I read it 4 times, and each time I felt worse. The dates were real. Christmas 2016, Thanksgiving 2018, Dad's 75th birthday in 2019, Dad's hospital stay in early 2020. But the conversations, I didn't remember Dad ever saying anything like that, and I'd been present at all those family gatherings. Surely I would have known if Dad had promised Brian 40% of my business. I hired a lawyer, Robert Chen, one of the best litigation attorneys in Edmonton. He read the claim and pursed his lips. This is going to be expensive, Tom. He's requesting mandatory mediation first, which is standard in Alberta for commercial disputes under 10 million. If mediation fails, we go to trial. Can he win? Can you actually lose a business just on a verbal promise? In Alberta, it's difficult but not impossible. If he can prove your father made a clear, specific promise, and that this promise was intended to create legal obligations, and that Brian relied on that promise to his detriment, then yes. It's called promissory estoppel, but the burden of proof is high. What about the company registration? My tax returns? 38 years as sole owner? That certainly helps us. But if a judge believes your father made a binding promise, the ownership records might not matter. The question is, did your father promise Brian 40% of the business? I thought about it. Dad had mentioned the business to both sons a few times over the years, usually after a couple of beers at Christmas, talking about legacy and family, but never specific. Never Brian, you own 40%. It was the vague sentimentality of an old man who wanted his sons to get along. Maybe, I admitted. Dad said some things over the years, but nothing specific, nothing legally binding. Robert nodded. That's what Brian's betting on. The vagueness works in his favor. He can claim Dad meant ownership. You can claim Dad meant emotional legacy. It becomes he said, she said, except your father isn't here to clarify. So what do? We go to mediation and hope for a reasonable settlement. Otherwise, we prepare for trial. Start gathering all documentation you have. Business records, incorporation documents, any letters or emails from your father, Any witnesses who heard these alleged promises? I spent the next month going through 38 years of documents. I found Dad's original $12,000 check, dated the 15th of March 1986. I found letters Dad had sent me over the years, mostly birthday cards and Christmas notes. One from 1998 said, "Proud of what you've built, son. You've created something special." Another from 2009 said, "Mitchell & Sons is a testament to your hard work and vision." None mentioned Brian. None mentioned shared ownership. I called the memory care facility where Mom lived and tried to talk to her about it. She was having a bad day. "Who are you?" she asked me. "Where's Donald?" Donald was my father. She'd been asking for him for 3 years. The mediation was scheduled for late February, almost a year and a half after Dad's death. The mediator was James Thornton, a retired judge in his mid-60s who specialized in family business disputes. Highly recommended. The first session took place in a bland conference room in a downtown Edmonton office building. Brian arrived with his lawyer, a sharp-dressed guy named Michael Stewart from Calgary. They sat across from me and Robert like we were negotiating a corporate merger, not destroying a family. James Thornton began with the standard mediator speech. "I'm here to help facilitate a resolution that's acceptable to both parties. This isn't a courtroom. I can't force anyone to do anything. But I can help you find common ground." Brian spoke first. His voice was calm, measured, the same voice he probably used when presenting financial reports to executives. "Tom, I don't want this to become a fight. We're brothers. But Dad made a promise, and I need you to honor it. He told me many times the business was for both of us. He saw my career path, recognized I wasn't making what you were, and wanted to balance things. That was his wish." I looked at my brother. He seemed sincere. That was the worst part. He actually seemed to believe this. "Brian, I've run Mitchell & Sons for 38 years. You never worked a single day there. You never even visited the office. When did this promise supposedly happen?" It wasn't one conversation, Tom. It was years of conversations. Dad would talk to me about the business, about how it was family legacy, about how he wanted both his sons taken care of. The specific times are in the claim. Christmas 2016. He sat me down and said, "Brian, don't worry. The business will be there for you. Tom knows it's for both my sons." Thanksgiving 2018. Same thing. At his 75th birthday, he repeated it. In the hospital in 2020, weeks before he died, he said it again. I was present at most of those events. I don't remember Dad saying that. "You were busy talking to Patricia's family or dealing with the grandkids. These were private conversations, Tom. Father and son." James Thornton intervened. "Let's focus on finding a solution. Brian, what would you see as a fair resolution?" 40% ownership formalized in legal documents. "I'm willing to let Tom continue as CEO and handle daily operations. I don't need to be involved in management. But I want my ownership stake recognized, and I want to start receiving 40% of the profits." Robert interrupted. "That's absurd. Mitchell & Sons generates approximately $1.2 million in annual profit. You're asking for $480,000 a year to do absolutely nothing." "I'm asking for what my father promised me." I found my voice. Even if Dad said something like that, which I'm not admitting, wouldn't it make more sense to interpret it as, "I'll help you if you need it," rather than literally giving you 40% of the company? Brian shook his head. "Dad was specific, Tom. He said the business was for both of us, not help Brian if he needs it. He said we both had a stake." The first mediation session ended with no progress. James Thornton scheduled 2 more sessions for the following month. Between sessions, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, thinking about those family gatherings Brian had mentioned, trying to remember Dad's exact words. Would he have said something that could be interpreted as a promise? I'd had a few beers at those parties. Been busy hosting, talking to everyone. Could I have missed something important? Patricia noticed. "You're not eating. You're not sleeping. This is killing you." If I lose this case, I lose everything. The business is valued at about $11 million. If Brian gets 40%, I'll either have to buy him out for $4.4 million, which I don't have, or sell the company and split the proceeds. Either way, Mitchell and Sons is finished. Brian wouldn't actually destroy the business. He's your brother. I don't think I know my brother anymore. The second mediation session was worse. James Thornton seemed to sympathize with Brian's position. He kept using phrases like family promises, moral obligations, your father's wishes. Tom, even if there's ambiguity in what your father said, don't you feel some obligation to honor his intent? He clearly wanted both his sons to benefit from the business. I felt my blood pressure rising. His intent was for me to build something and succeed, which I did. I've helped Brian over the years. I helped fund his CPA exam prep. I've covered Mom's care home costs, beyond his contribution. I've been a good brother. But you never offered him any stake in the business. Because it's my business. I built it. Every contract, every employee hired, every crisis overcome. That was me. Not Dad, not Brian. Me. James Thornton looked disappointed in me. Family businesses often involve these kinds of informal arrangements, Tom. Courts recognize that not everything needs to be written down. Sometimes a father's word to his son is enough. That's when I realized he'd already made up his mind. He thought Brian deserved something, maybe not 40%, but something substantial. And as mediator, he was steering us toward that outcome. Robert noticed too. After the session, he pulled me aside. I don't like this, Thornton's showing bias. If he recommends a settlement and you reject it, that could look bad if we go to trial. Sometimes judges give weight to mediators' recommendations. What do I do? We need evidence, hard evidence, something that shows your father didn't intend Brian to become an owner. Letters, documents, witnesses, anything. I spent another week digging through old files. I found business loans from 1986 in the 90s, all in my name. I found the original business registration from 1986. I found tax returns from all 38 years, all showing me as sole proprietor, and, after incorporation in 1997, sole shareholder. But I also found something else. A letter from Dad, dated 2011, in a box of old personal documents. It was addressed to me, handwritten in Dad's messy scrawl. Tom, just wanted you to know how proud I am. Mitchell & Sons is proof that hard work and dedication pay off. You took my $12,000 and turned it into something extraordinary. That's all you, son. Your vision, your effort, your success. Keep building. Love, Dad. I read it 6 times. That's all you, son. Your vision, your effort, your success. Not your and Brian's success. Not our family business. Your success. I brought the letter to Robert. He smiled. This is good, Tom. This is very good. This shows your father viewed the company as yours, not as family legacy. The third mediation session was scheduled for March 20th, 3 weeks before what would have been Dad's 80th birthday, 3.5 years after his death. That morning, I arrived early. I sat in my truck in the parkade, holding Dad's letter in my hand. I thought about calling Brian, trying one more time to reason with him before we went in. But what would I say? We'd already said everything. I walked into the conference room. Brian was already there, looking confident. Michael Stewart was reviewing documents. James Thornton was setting up his laptop. We sat down. Robert put Dad's letter on the table. Before we begin, he said, I'd like to introduce new evidence. This is a letter from Donald Mitchell to Tom, dated June 2011. I'll read the relevant portion. He read Dad's words aloud. The part about your vision, your effort, your success. Brian's expression didn't change, but I saw his lawyer lean in and whisper something to him. James Thornton frowned. This is certainly interesting, but it's from 2011. Brian's claim involves statements made between 2016 and 2020. Your father's views may have changed. Robert nodded. Certainly possible, but it establishes a pattern. Donald Mitchell viewed Mitchell & Sons as Tom's business, Tom's success, not a family legacy. One letter doesn't contradict years of verbal promises, Michael Stewart said. Perhaps not, Robert replied, but let's talk about those verbal promises. Brian claims his father made specific statements on specific dates. Christmas 2016, Thanksgiving 2018, Donald Mitchell's 75th birthday in March 2019. Hospital stay in February 2020. He claims these were private conversations, just father and son. That's right, Brian said. Robert opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I've subpoenaed the medical records of Donald Mitchell from his family physician, Dr. Sarah Wong, covering the period from 2015 until his death in 2020. James Thornton looked up sharply. Medical records? What does that have to do with... Donald Mitchell suffered a major stroke in October 2015, Robert said. Dr. Wong's notes indicate significant cognitive impairment following the stroke. The family was informed. The recommended treatment plan included monitoring for vascular dementia, and the family was advised to document any major decisions or promises, as the patient might become confused about prior statements. The room went silent. Brian found his voice. That doesn't mean Dad didn't have dementia. Mom had that. Dad had the stroke, but he recovered. Your mother was diagnosed with vascular dementia in 2018, Robert said. Your father was diagnosed with post-stroke cognitive impairment in late 2015, with progression to vascular dementia by 2017. The family was informed. Were you informed, Brian? I remembered. The doctor's appointment in 2015, right after the stroke. Dad asked me to come with him. Early stages. Doctor. Wong said he'd have good days and bad days, might repeat stories, could forget recent conversations, still capable of managing his affairs for now, but we should watch for decline. After that, I'd taken over managing Dad's affairs, the bills, the medications, eventually the decision to move Mom into the care home when Dad couldn't manage her anymore. I'd assumed Brian knew about Dad's diagnosis. But he lived in Calgary, visited maybe 4 times a year. Maybe I never told him explicitly. Maybe I assumed Mom had mentioned it. Christmas 2016 conversation, Brian describes. Robert flipped through pages. Dr. Wong's notes from December 2016 indicate Donald Mitchell was experiencing increased confusion and short-term memory loss. The doctor specifically noted that Donald was having trouble distinguishing recent events from past events and occasionally made statements inconsistent with reality. Robert pulled more pages. Thanksgiving 2018. 3 weeks before that, Donald Mitchell had a second, smaller stroke. Hospital records show temporary cognitive impairment. His doctor noted the patient was experiencing disorientation and confabulation. That's when the brain creates false memories to fill gaps. March 2019, 75th birthday. By this point, Donald Mitchell's vascular dementia had progressed to moderate stage. Dr. Wong's notes from February 2019 state, patient should not make financial or legal decisions without family supervision. Cognitive functions significantly impaired. February 2020, the hospital stay. Donald Mitchell was admitted with congestive heart failure. Neurological assessment noted advanced dementia, severe confusion, limited short-term memory function. Brian was pale. I didn't know. Dad seemed fine at those gatherings. He was talking, joking, remembering stories. Dementia patients often appear fine in social situations, Robert said, not unkindly. They can mask symptoms, especially in early stages. But the medical evidence is clear. Your father did not have the cognitive capacity to make binding promises during the period you described. And even if he said something, a promise made by someone with documented cognitive impairment cannot form the basis for a lawsuit. James Thornton was reading the medical records, and his expression had changed. I wasn't aware of this diagnosis. This significantly alters the analysis. Michael Stewart was reading the documents quickly. Even if Donald Mitchell had cognitive issues, that doesn't automatically invalidate everything he said. If he made these promises before the diagnosis was in late 2015, Robert said. The promises Brian alleges occurred between 2016 and 2020, well after the diagnosis. And the letter I presented earlier, from 2011, shows that before his illness, Donald Mitchell explicitly viewed the business as solely Tom's. I looked at my brother. He was staring at the table, all confidence gone. Brian, I said quietly, Did Dad really say those things, or did you hear what you wanted to hear? He looked up, and for the first time in months, I saw my little brother instead of my adversary. He said it, Tom. I swear he did. Christmas 2016. We were in the kitchen, just us. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Brian. The business is for both my sons. Tom knows it'll be there for you." I remember it clearly. "I believe you remember it," I said. "But Dad had vascular dementia, Brian." He was confused. Maybe he was thinking about the $12,000 he gave me and somehow in his confused mind thought that meant the company belonged to both of us. Maybe he was trying to make you feel better about your accountant's salary. But it wasn't a promise. It wasn't real. Brian's eyes were wet. He said it every time I visited. Every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, he'd pull me aside and say not to worry, that I'd be taken care of, that the business was ours. I thought it meant something. It meant Dad loved you, I said. It meant he wanted you to feel secure. But it wasn't a legal promise, and it didn't reflect reality. James Thornton cleared his throat. "Given this new medical evidence, I don't believe mediation will result in an outcome favorable to Brian's position. If this proceeds to trial, a judge will almost certainly find that Donald Mitchell lacked capacity to make binding promises during the period in question." Michael Stewart was already packing his briefcase. "I need to consult with my client. Can we take a recess?" We took a break. Robert and I went to a coffee shop across the street. My hands were shaking as I ordered. "Did you know about your father's diagnosis?" Robert asked. I knew. I guess after dealing with it for so long, it became normal. I didn't think about how it would affect conversations from years ago. I didn't think Brian didn't know. "Your mother was diagnosed later and went into care. Your father's condition must have been discussed." Brian was in Calgary, visited maybe 4 times a year, phone calls every couple weeks. Maybe I thought someone else told him. Maybe I just assumed. Or maybe he knew and didn't want to remember because it complicated his claim. I didn't want to believe that. I wanted to believe my brother had genuinely misunderstood, that he'd heard Dad's confused rambling and thought it was a promise. We returned to the conference room. Brian and his lawyer were already there. Brian looked defeated. Michael Stewart spoke first. "In light of the medical evidence presented, we're prepared to discuss settlement. Brian is no longer seeking ownership of the company. However, we believe there's still a moral obligation to recognize the family contribution to the business. We're proposing a one-time payment of $600,000 in recognition of Donald Mitchell's initial investment and family legacy." Robert scoffed. "You mean in recognition of Brian's failed lawsuit? Not happening." "Tom," Brian said, ignoring the lawyers. "Dad gave you $12,000 in 1986, adjusted for inflation. That's about $36,000 in today's dollars. The company's worth $11 million. Dad's investment started all of this. Don't I deserve something for that? You want me to pay you $600,000 because Dad gave me $12,000 38 years ago? Money I've already repaid hundreds of times over by helping you with your certification, covering Mom's care costs, being the son who actually stayed in Edmonton and took care of our parents. I want recognition that this isn't just your success. It was built with family support. Every business is built with family support. Every success story starts with someone helping someone else. But that doesn't mean you own my company." James Thornton tried to mediate, perhaps a smaller amount, a gesture of family goodwill. I felt something snap inside me. "No." Everyone looked at me. "No," I repeated. "I'm not paying Brian anything. Not $600,000, not $60,000, not $6,000. You know why? Because this lawsuit has already cost me over $95,000 in legal fees. It's cost me sleep, stress, almost a year of my life. It's damaged my relationship with my brother, maybe permanently. And why? Because my father, in his confusion, said some vague things about family that Brian twisted into a claim of ownership. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. You want to talk about family contribution? Let's talk numbers. From 2018 to 2024, Mom's memory care has cost $518,000. I've paid $470,000 of that. You've paid $48,000. That's money I've taken out of my pocket, from the business, from my own retirement savings, To care for our mother while you sent your monthly $600 check and visited 3 times a year. I scrolled through more records. Your CPA exam prep, 2005 to 2007. When your study loan fell through, I sent $22,000. You paid back $7,000. That was 17 years ago, Brian. I never asked for the rest. 2012. When you were between jobs and couldn't make your mortgage, I sent $15,000. 2016. When your car died and you needed a down payment on a new one, $8,000. 2020. During the pandemic, when your company cut salaries by 20%, I sent $2,000 a month for 10 months. That's another $20,000. I put the phone down. I've given you over $500,000 over the past 20 years, Brian. Some as loans you never repaid, some as gifts. I never kept track. Never asked for the money back because that's what family does. But now you're here demanding another $600,000 because Dad's dementia made him say confused things about a business you never contributed to? The room was silent. Brian's voice was almost a whisper. I didn't remember all of that. Of course you didn't, because I never made you remember. I never held it over you. I helped because you're my brother. But apparently that means nothing to you. Michael Stewart stood. I think we're done here. Brian, we should discuss your options. There are no options, Robert said. If you proceed to trial, Tom will present the medical evidence, the business records, and documentation of his financial support to Brian over decades. No judge in Alberta will rule in your favor. You'll lose, and you'll be liable for Tom's legal costs, which currently stand at $95,000 and counting. Brian stood slowly. He looked at me, and I saw my little brother again. 17 years old, looking up to me. I'm sorry, Tom, I thought. I don't know what I thought. Dad said those things, and I wanted them to be true. I wanted there to be something for me, some security beyond my pension. I wanted to matter in the family business. You could have just asked, Brian, if you'd come to me and said, Tom, I'm struggling. Can you help? I would have helped. I always did. But you didn't ask. You demanded. You sued me. I know. He looked at his lawyer. Michael, withdraw the lawsuit. It's over. Brian, I'd advise. It's over. Tom's right. I let Dad's confused rambling become something it wasn't. I convinced myself I deserved half of something I never built. He looked back at me. I'm sorry, Tom. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know I'm sorry. He left. Michael Stewart gathered his papers and followed. James Thornton looked uncomfortable. I apologize, Tom. I should have investigated the family circumstances more thoroughly before forming initial impressions. I nodded. He left. Robert was smiling. That's what we call a complete victory. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like I'd just lost my brother. Patricia was waiting when I got home. I told her everything. She held my hand and sat quietly for a long time. Are you okay? She finally asked. I don't know. I won, but I feel like I lost something bigger. Dad's gone. Mom doesn't remember who I am most of the time. And now it's just me and Brian, and I don't know if we can come back from this. He apologized. He apologized after his lawyer told him he had no chance of winning. That's not real remorse. That's accepting defeat. Patricia squeezed my hand. People are complicated, Tom. Maybe Brian really did misunderstand. Maybe Dad's dementia created this whole situation. Maybe your brother isn't a villain, just someone who made a terrible mistake. I thought about that for days. Christmas came. Brian didn't call. I didn't call him either. I sent him a card, like I did every year since we were kids. He didn't send one back. 3 weeks later, I received a letter, handwritten on accounting firm, letterhead. Tom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I've been doing a lot of thinking since the mediation ended. I've been seeing a therapist, talking to colleagues who've worked in family conflict mediation, trying to understand what happened. I think I created a narrative in my head based on Dad's confused statements, and I convinced myself it was real because I wanted it to be real. I wanted to feel like I mattered, like I was part of your success. That was selfish and wrong. I should have been proud of you, should have celebrated what you built instead of trying to claim credit for it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm in therapy. I'm trying to understand why I did this, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that I hurt you. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Your brother, Brian. I read the letter 4 times. Showed it to Patricia. What do you think? I asked. I think he means it. I think he's horrified by what he did and trying to make it right. Is sorry enough? I don't know. That's up to you. I didn't call Brian. Not that day. Not that week. But I kept the letter. 3 months later, in June 2024, I got a call from the memory care facility. Mom had passed peacefully in her sleep. I called Brian. He answered on the first ring. Tom, Mom died this morning. Silence. Then, I'll be there tomorrow. What do you need me to do? We planned the funeral together. Divided the tasks. I handled the funeral home and the service arrangements. He handled the obituary and contacted relatives. We were efficient, professional, like business partners. We didn't talk about the lawsuit. At the funeral, Brian sat next to me. During the eulogy, he started crying. I put my hand on his shoulder, the way Dad used to do for both of us when we were kids. After the service, we stood together by Mom's casket. I'm sorry, Brian said. Not just for the lawsuit, but for everything. For not being there more when Mom was sick. For not helping Dad more. For being the son who left and expected you to handle everything. I don't want to talk about the lawsuit today, Brian. I know. I just need you to know I regret it. All of it. We buried Mom next to Dad at Edmonton Cemetery. Same cemetery where we'd buried our grandparents. Family ground, Patricia called it. A week later, Brian called me. Can we have coffee? Just talk. We met at a Tim Hortons, same chain where I'd been a year earlier, processing his lawsuit. We ordered coffee and sat across from each other. I've been thinking about Dad's letter, Brian said. The one from 2011. Your vision, your effort, your success. That's what it said, right? Yeah, he was right. It was all you. And I tried to take that from you because I was envious. I stirred my coffee. Why were you envious? You had a good career, a good life. I was the smart son, the educated one, the one who was supposed to do great things. But you were the one who built something real, something that employs people, creates value, that'll exist after you're gone. I wrote journal articles read by 12 people. You built Mitchell & Sons. Your articles mattered, Brian. You taught hundreds of students. It wasn't enough. It never felt enough. And when Dad started getting confused, started saying things about the business being for both of us, I latched onto it. I created this whole story in my head where I deserved 40% because Dad always wanted to balance things between us. It was delusional. Maybe it wasn't delusional. Maybe it was just human. Brian looked at me. Can we start over? Not forget what happened, but start building something new? I don't want to lose my brother over this. I thought about Dad's confused promises, about Brian's lawsuit, about the year of stress and the $95,000 in legal fees. I thought about 38 years of building a business, being the son who stayed, taking care of our parents. I don't know if we can get back to what we were, I said. Honestly, that trust is broken. But maybe we can figure out what we can be now. That's all I'm asking. We talked for 3 hours. About Dad, about Mom, about our kids, about the future. We didn't solve everything. Some wounds take time to heal. But it was a start. A month later, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Brian with a proposal. I'm thinking about retiring, I told him. I'm 62. Been at this for 38 years. I'm tired. My knees hurt. I want to travel with Patricia while we still can. Makes sense. I'm planning to transition the business to my senior managers over the next 5 years, selling them shares gradually and letting them buy me out. But before I do that, I want to create a scholarship fund at NAIT. $120,000 for students in construction management who want to start their own businesses. I'd like to name it the Donald Mitchell Memorial Scholarship. Brian was quiet for a moment. That's beautiful, Tom. I'd like you to help me administer it. You're the accountant. You know how university scholarships work. It'd be a way for us to honor Dad's memory together. I'd be honored. Really. But there's a condition? What? You need to come to the office. See the business you tried to claim 40% of. Meet the people who work there. Understand what I built. He came the following week. I gave him a tour of Mitchell and Sons. Showed him the workshop where we fabricated custom components. The project management offices where we planned builds. The showroom where clients viewed our past work. He met my employees, some of whom had worked with me for 20 years. At the end of the tour, Brian looked at me. I didn't understand. I really didn't. This isn't just a business. It's 38 years of relationships, of craftsmanship, of your life. This is what Dad's 12,000 became when someone actually put in the work. I'm sorry I tried to take it. I know you are. We established the Donald Mitchell Memorial Scholarship that summer. The first recipient was a young woman from Red Deer who wanted to start a sustainable building company. At the award ceremony, Brian and I stood on stage together, and for the first time in 3 years, we looked like brothers again. We're not the brothers we were before the lawsuit. Those brothers are gone. But maybe we've become something better. Brothers who went through fire and came out scarred but still standing. Patricia asked me once if I forgave Brian. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I forgive him for being human, I said. For being envious, for being weak, for making a mistake. But I can't forget what he did. I can't forget the year of stress, the feeling of betrayal by my own brother, the realization that family loyalty has limits. I forgive him, but things will never be the same. Is that enough? It has to be. Because the alternative is losing him completely, and I don't want that either. Brian and I talk every couple of weeks now. We have dinner once a month. We work together on the scholarship. We visited Mom's grave on what would have been her 80th birthday. We're building something new, something different from what we had before. But I keep Dad's letter from 2011 inches my desk drawer. Your vision, your effort, your success. On difficult days, when the old anger surfaces, I read it and remember that the business was mine. I built it. And no revisionist history or confused promises can change that. Mitchell and Sons will be sold to my managers by 2029. I'll retire, travel with Patricia, spend time with my grandkids. The business will continue under new direction, new vision. That feels right. And Brian will be in my life in whatever way we can manage. Not as close as before, but not completely lost. Somewhere in between. Because in the end, that's what family is. Not perfection, not unconditional trust, not fairy tales. Just people doing their best, making mistakes, hurting each other, and trying to find a way forward. I'm 62 years old. I built a business, raised a family, and survived a lawsuit from my own brother. I learned that documentation matters more than trust, that family promises need to be in writing, that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. But I also learned that people are complicated, that motivations are layered, and that sometimes the villain in your story is just your confused little brother who made a terrible mistake. I don't know if that's wisdom or just exhaustion, but it's where I've landed, and for now, that's enough.